So the title of my talk today is posing the question, are income benefits of biofuel production in sub-Saharan Africa offset by their environmental costs? This is part of a larger project funded by ESPA that is titled Unraveling Biofuel Impacts on Ecosystem Services, Human Well-being and Poverty Alleviation in Sub-Saharan Africa. And we have, it's easier for me to stand this side. And we have so many institutional partners, as you can see from there. So we have, within the entire project team, the project is led by University of Oxford, where we have Professor Kathy Willis as the PI, and we also have a postdoc. And we have Council for Scientific and Industrial Research in South Africa. And then SCI, so where today there's me, but there's also Anne Nyambane, who is a capacity building fellow in that project. And then we had Center for Agriculture Research and Development in Malawi and the University of Tokyo in Japan. So our work is organized in different packages. Okay. Yes, so those are the project team members. So what's the main motivation behind this project? So generally when you hear of biofuels, you'll hear almost two parallel arguments. Those who are promoting them as positive, and then you also have a lot of activism about how biofuels is leading to land grabbing and leading to food insecurity and all these other negative impacts. So in all these debates and in all this, then the real question on what is the true human well-being and poverty alleviation effect of biofuel expansion is not understood. So there's been very limited empirical research into whether they are positive or negative. Because, for instance, biofuel expansion in Africa, while it could lead to, say, loss of land, ecosystem services provided by that land, possibly food insecurity and poverty, but they can also be benefits. Because the opportunity for earning an income and the value of cash income, especially for poor rural households, should not be underestimated. And that income could in itself cushion households against food insecurity, for instance. And there's also, we miss opportunities for looking at win-win benefits. Because take, for example, production of biofuels in sub-Saharan Africa, some of it for the transport sector, but you also have households not having energy for cooking. So could there be ways of even balancing those in order to achieve gains? So we used, for this project, we used a case study approach in 4 countries. So in Malawi, and we had Duangwa Sugar Company as one of the study area and the communities around it. Then we also had BAL that produces jatropha. So in Duangwa it's sugarcane production. And then there's Nickel in Mozambique. And then we had Swede, which is also sugar production, but in Swaziland. The case studies were selected and for the following, to try and get key differences in those groups in terms of feedstock production mode. So for instance, in Malawi you have it's smallholder based projects. So farmers produce their own cane and supply to the company. And then in Mozambique you have a very large scale plantation. While in Swaziland, you have sort of a mixed model because you have farmers producing the cane, so smallholder based, but then it's the land that the farmers own is pulled together to form one large plantation. and they are shareholders in that sugar producing company. But then we are also trying to classify them by use as well, so that for transport sector, so for Duangwa and Balanika, the biofuel produced is blended and used for domestic transport. Then we had the case of Clean Star in Mozambique, which unfortunately has closed by now, was using cassava that's planted by farmers and then processing into liquid ethanol fuel for cooking, for cook stoves in Maputo. And then we have Bal in Malawi that contracted, so got farmers to plant jatropha and supply to them with the aim of blending this into paraffin. And then in terms of, so the idea was to compare all those cases to see the income benefits, but also impact on ecosystem services, which could be from here, for instance, if you have a large-scale plantation, then you have a plantation there. So this is the original landscape. So possibly the influence could be larger compared to, say, if you have small plantations. But then you also have these ones in one area, while these ones distributed across different areas, which could also impact differently. And our main research question. So there are several questions. This project is multidisciplinary. Each institution has different questions they are looking at, but for SEI, our main question was how can biofuel production and use become an agent for poverty alleviation in Africa? And we had three hypotheses. One is that biofuel projects provide higher income than other agricultural activities. So we were comparing income that people get from producing cane or jatropha versus income they get from the traditional crops they would be producing. And then also whether smallholder-based biofuel projects offer higher income and employment benefits than large plantations. And within the case studies, we had both to be able to draw the comparison. And then the third hypothesis was that income from smallholder feedstock production increases the resilience of households to livelihood shocks. So we had a lot of questions also in terms of this income that they get from cane. What is it spent on? So does it really go to food, for instance, or is it used for drinking or other uses that may not even benefit the household eventually? And we were using an ecosystem services approach in the whole project. So we had the Oxford is looking, for instance, at the whole ecosystem services, including doing LCA to look at greenhouse gas emissions from the sugarcane production factories, transport, and so on, but also the effect on water quality and the general effect on human being. We had food security questions that are being tackled by the University of Tokyo, and then the socioeconomic impact that SEI is looking at. So we used a couple different methods for the data collection. So we had one-on-one questionnaire interviews with about 1,200 households. So farmers, for those who are engaged in farming biofuels, and we also had control groups coming from within the same area but who are not growing cane, and those from outside the cane growing area. And then there are also focus group discussions to complement these questionnaire interviews, but also for specific groups such as workers in the sugarcane companies. And then we also did sort of community surveys, so like walk around different markets to see to observe various factors, but also collect additional data. There was a water sampling collection, and so like for the Oxford group. So I think that we have I have very preliminary results that I would present now. But maybe at this point I'll also raise a bit of a challenge, which an earlier presenter had also mentioned at the start, that there are some of these questions you ask, but the kind of responses you get. So in terms of the quantitative methods versus qualitative, how really do some of these methods serve you? So this information, for instance, this one is based on the questionnaire data. So we have an average age of the household members 44 years, and I think we had no concerns with that kind of data. Highest education. This one is important because from this you see that in total you have 62% of all the people we interviewed who have not completed primary school. So, which could imply the opportunity for getting employed in sectors, in different sectors is quite low. So having the company there was one possible benefit in terms of employment. And you can see you have about 19% who were employed on average in the sector, more in some of the countries than others. And it's not just those we interviewed, but also the family members. In a few had some type of employment in the sector. And the potential for employment is, you can see further from here as well, that for those who moved to the area, quite a number, up to 16%, the reason for moving was because they were coming in based on the employment opportunity created by the sugarcane factory or the Jatropha company being there. Now the income data, which we still have to work on. So this is the average from the figures we got. Some of the blanks are left because we are still relooking at that data where the values sometimes given did not make good sense. But overall, it doesn't appear to be quite much in terms of what households earn from working in the company on average. But then in terms of also how do you accurately capture this data, because it was asking how much income have you received over the past 12 months. And then they give their responses. Sorry, this is income from growing of the biofuels, not from employment. So in terms of how much money do you get from biofuels growing? So we have a secondary method where we go and try to trace from each time for sugarcane when it's harvested, then they have a whole record of how much tons they sold and how much income they received. And often we found there's quite high discrepancy in terms of what they report and what you see. With Jatropha, actually what they said was that there was no income they get. So what happened with the case of Jatropha, like in Malawi, is that this company came, BAL, and did a very aggressive promotion of Jatropha growing with a plan to blend it into fuel that's to be used in vehicles. So a lot of farmers went and planted the Jatropha, and then the company more or less collapsed because they could not get the license to produce the oil. So farmers were left stuck with a crop which they have nothing else to do with. They have no use for Jatropha at all. So even from the interviews, from the qualitative data is more interesting, but it's in terms of frustration with having dedicated effort to get into growing these crops that is not helping them in any way. And like sugar, for which biofuel is a secondary product. The primary product it's used for is sugar, for which there's a market. So for Jatropha, it's like there's really no income benefit, income they get from it. And then in terms of employment, so we had around 320 people out of the 1,200 who were employed in the sector. So there were those employed in the estate, so whether it's management level or other work in the office, but also those in the plantations, like cutting cane. Again, these are the income figures we have, which we again will have to cross-check. So from their trough, of course, the company for the Malay is not there, but for the sugar cane, you have the 662 as the average income that they get, which we have to verify again. And then compared to other employment, you had about, average comes to about $136. So it points to possibly this one is higher, gives higher income than the other sectors. So the next step is that, like I said, these were very preliminary results. We are still going on with the analysis, so further cross-checking and finding other ways of getting accurately this income data, and then comparing the different biofuel production modes, for instance. You are those who do the small-scale production, large-scale production. There's those which are rain-fed and irrigated farms. So which one offers higher income? And then by type of employment. And we want to see biofuel income versus other forms of income. And then income uses. So to analyze what is this income used for. And then later we'll do now the hypothesis test, and to be able to control for all the confounders. Because one thing, for instance, if you are employed in biofuel sector as a manager and earning high income, even if that sector was not there, you'd still be employed somewhere else. So we really need to tease out what is the income benefit from biofuel when you control for all these other factors. And then finally, so then we'll be able to compare income benefits to the environmental impacts. So what is it they lose in terms of ecosystem services compared to this income they gain? So this other analysis is being done by Oxford, and we'll be merging the two data sets to then get the final result. So yes, so I've already mentioned some of this, that for instance, low education levels suggest probability that there could be benefit of employment from these companies. But important to fully understand the trade-offs. Thank you, and sorry that our results are not yet very final and very informative. Thank you.
Thanks, Caroline. And we've got some time for a couple of questions, if anyone has questions for Caroline. Yes, there are a few. I'll go there and
then. Thanks for the very interesting presentation. Now, biofuel production and use, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, is still at a very low level in terms of the technology, in terms of in terms of understanding exactly what to do. But there's one critical element in terms of the price of the various outputs, the various biofuels versus the fossil fuels. Are they comparable in terms of pricing? And if that's the case, how are people reacting in those 4 countries to it in terms of use of the products of these biofuel projects?
Okay. So for the transport sector, for instance, in Malawi, they blend. So they use the biofuel to blend it with the petrol. So as a result, it saves them from the amount they would have had to import in the petrol. So from a country's perspective, they find it cheaper, and that's why they've had that production going on for almost 30 years plus. In fact, Malawi, I think, is the only country in sub-Saharan Africa that has had it for that long, biofuel production. And that was the most mature one that we got. Otherwise, for cooking, this company, Clean Star, started it, and really we were going to do it very large scale, started a very big state-of-the-art company, contracting farmers to supply cassava and then use it to produce fuel for the market. So there was already interest. People were already buying that fuel, but there's competition with charcoal, which is cheaper. So that in itself could be a hindrance. People will go for what's cheaper to buy.
Great. Yes, I just had a technical question, Caroline, about sugar. So it sounds like from the data you have so far, sugar is probably a better bet than jatropha. It's already being produced, income is being made from it. But I wasn't clear whether a farmer who grows sugar for biofuel is getting a biofuel benefit in addition to sugar production or as a substitute. And I think it's rather interesting for a couple of reasons. The reason I'm particularly interested in it is thinking across the SDGs, there's a tremendous health co-benefit associated with substituting sugar production, and that'll be much more important in years to come as sugar becomes a less acceptable agricultural product. But specifically, though, from the farmer's point of view, are they going to, if we're going to convert the sugar industry into a biofuel industry, for which there's tremendous scope, certainly in Africa, are you measuring the additional benefit of conversion to biofuel, or is it an incremental benefit of producing sugar and biofuel?
Okay. Interesting question. So what happens, like in Malawi, is that the farmers produce their cane, and then they are paid per ton of cane harvested by the company. Now, the fact that the company uses this to produce sugar and biofuel, in fact, I think they're also using it to produce molasses and other byproducts. So one of the major complaints that was coming is that farmers are not paid for these additional products. So the company says they only pay for the weight of cane. The role of sugar is, or cane production. So I think from the farmer's perspective, it doesn't matter what that cane is used for, but they really value they seem to really value that income, because everybody we interviewed who was not farming cane, they say it was because they've not yet been registered by those cane producing factories. Otherwise, if they were, they would all be producing the cane. So,
thank you. That was very interesting. And there were a few more questions, but maybe this can be discussed over the posters and over a glass of something after this. Thank you very much. Great.